Hello, I'm Jazze with 97.9 The Beat, and my guests are investigative reporters Miles Moffeit and Sue Ambrose from the Dallas Morning News. And I also have Renee Phillips and Donna Fields. I would like to thank you all for joining me today. Today, we are going to have a very difficult conversation and a complex discussion about sexual assault, child abuse allegations, and possible deceit regarding Pastor Rickie Rush. He's a well-known, respected pastor in the Dallas community that founded IBOC, or Inspiring Body of Christ Church. Before we begin, I would like to make it known that we did reach out to Pastor Rickie Rush to address these allegations, and we were referred to his lawyer, Michael Haskell, who released this statement to the Dallas Morning News. He emphasized that some of the allegations date back decades and asked that the judgment be withheld until all of the relevant facts and circumstances are revealed. At any time, we will be happy to hear his side of the story whenever Pastor Rickie Rush would like to speak. On September 20th, the Dallas Morning News released an article titled, "Don't Let the Devil Steal Your Joy." A teacher turned evangelist built a Dallas megachurch as a survivor, as a warrior battling Satan. It was the perfect mask to abuse members, they say. The news pieced this story together by reviewing hundreds of pages of documents, including court dispositions, police affidavits, church memos, school records, photographs, memoirs, calendars, and therapist evaluations. More than 50 people were interviewed about various aspects of the church Renee and Donna attended. Before we begin, I think it's important to not silence the voices of Black women. These women have bravely come forward, and it's important that we hear what they have to say. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank
Donna
you.
and Renee, I want to start with you. I understand this is a very difficult for you both to discuss, and I applaud you both for your bravery. Renee, let me start with you. At the age of 19, in the article, you stated that it was the first time Pastor Rickie Rush tried to penetrate you at Skyline High School. You ended up leaving the school in tears, and after that incident, why did you not decide to tell anyone?
Okay. The reason why I didn't tell anyone is because I was
Oh, I think we lost her. Okay. We'll go ahead and move on to Donna. Pretty much the same question with you because Renee is your sister, and you both were being sexually assaulted by Pastor Rickie Rush, according to the article. And for you, how was it that you didn't know that your sister was being abused, and then you were also being abused at the same time?
No, ma'am. It was not at the same time. I'm older than my sister. This was happening my junior year. My sister, well, as far as I know, I don't think she was being abused at this time. But the reason why I didn't come out at that time, I've asked myself 1,000,001 times this question because I never saw him as my abuser. It wasn't until 2018 that I even realized the weight of what he did and was able to say that he was my abuser. You know, back then he chose my friends. So who would I tell? You know, he chose my friends. My friends would tell him things about me. They kept an eye on me for him, so they always reported back to him. I was already pregnant and had stirred up a lot of trouble at home. My parents weren't talking to me, so my dad he was preaching when it came. My dad, when he found out that I was pregnant, my parents completely stopped talking to me. We were in the house and they just weren't talking. So, and my dad stopped preaching. That it was said to me that my dad was not allowed to preach because I had gotten pregnant. So, you know, it was a lot going on at that time. He was everything to me. He was my person that I spoke to. Okay. So that's how it's always been. Even up through remaining around him. He's just always chosen my friends and from my doctors to my dentist, just I did not realize the weight of this until 2018, and that he did not just have a thing for me, because that's what I just thought. I saw it as he has this thing for me because he would say that I reminded him of his wife.
Oh.
And yes. And so I didn't like the thing that he had for me, but I liked him. He was a very likable person, so
What age were you when the sexual assault happened?
Well, I was 16 years old when all of the various things transpired. I was 16 and pregnant.
And that's the first time, because in the article it says, he helped throw your baby shower, and you were vulnerable, really. And in the class at the school, you said he did some inappropriate things at the school. And so, at 16, you can't really give consent to an older man. So that's something that should be noted at this time. Renee, I see we lost you, but yes, if you could go ahead and let me know exactly when the first sexual assault happened with you, and also why you decided not to speak out when it first happened.
Okay. So yes, it was my sophomore year. I'm sorry, we were talking about when I was 19. For me, my sexual assault occurred when I was 19, but also when I was 16, when I was in a play with him, as far as him sticking his tongue in my mouth during a play, that he asked me to come in his office to rehearse and pretend for the kiss scene. But to answer your question, at 19, um, when I was in his office, yes, he was trying to penetrate me. He was kissing and touching and doing all of that. And I was constantly saying no, got louder and things like that. And finally, he apologized, just begged me not to tell anybody, my sister or my mom. And um, initially, you're just in a state of shock because I knew how long I've been at the church. I'm a student. My sister respected him. So, and then who's going to believe me? So I was battling mentally and processing what was taking place. And so I had already dealt with the molestation, from my mother's boyfriend, but that was handled differently. It was I initiated, immediately responded, because it wasn't the grooming process didn't happen. It was onset of, one incident where this was gradually, So I left perplexed. I could barely drive home. Like I said, I pulled over at that Whataburger and just cried and screamed. I didn't know, because I never thought he knew our background and history and family dynamics. I never thought that he could be like anybody else, doing this, just
Right.
out of respect.
Yeah. And so, Miles and Sue, I kind of want to bring you guys into this conversation at this time, because the Dallas Morning News is a respected, uh, you know, news source. And we know that you can't just put salacious content out, such as TMZ. And you had to do quite a bit of research before you put this article out. And, I want to know what first made you believe that this, the lady's stories was credible, and how long was your investigation before you actually put this article out?
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. And Jazze, thanks for having us on. It's an incredibly important story. And I think I want to be very clear here because, Rickie Rush is a very prominent, very powerful man in the community. And like you said, this requires a really intensive investigation. But here we are still in the Me Too movement, where stories like this are becoming, very pervasive. I mean, the patterns have been established time and time again. Look at the news, look at the research. Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, Larry Nassar, R. Kelly, just a few. Powerful men exploiting vulnerable women and children. Renee and Donna were kids. They were kids. You listen to their stories, the things, you look for. Well, let me back up. There's an incredible power imbalance between these men and those that they're victimizing. It's so lopsided that the women experience great fear, shame, guilt, if they were to ever divulge how they were tricked or forced into a private space with these men. So it often takes years for them to muster the courage to step forward, knowing people will often automatically be siding with the powerful, automatically questioning how such a powerful, charismatic person could do such a thing. And that's really important to understand. Predators are so skilled at deceit and trickery that the women and investigators like us are left to sort through the evidence to prove that their accounts are credible. So we're left with, okay, did they tell anybody at the time? Again, it's very, very common for women and children to keep these things secret because it is so difficult to confront this powerful person. But in each of their cases, Renee and Donna, ultimately they went to therapy. They were seeking help for trauma they were experiencing over the years. And so we look for, evidence of these signs, the PTSD, the anxiety disorders. We spoke with their therapists who confirmed that they had PTSD, very disturbing memories. And as reporters, we have to illustrate, the damage that's done. And with both Renee and Donna, they can barely walk into a church. They can barely drive by a church without feeling, overwhelmed. Renee remembers the color of the suspenders that he was wearing when she said he attacked her. When she sees men in suspenders to this day, it rattles her. So yeah, they're dealing with intense trauma that's proven in these therapy reports, these notes that therapists gave us. So that gives you some idea. But we, like you said earlier, we spoke to more than 50 people to understand whether their experiences were accurate. Were they at the school Rickie Rush used to taught at Skyline High School, where they said that the sexual aggression began, the grooming began. We got their school records. We found pictures, some, depicting intimate embraces, Rush holding Renee's hands close to him. Their stories were so consistent and so strong, like many of the women who've, exposed Bill Cosby and others, that we felt very comfortable with their stories, and it gave us even more motivation to keep going. And it took about 1.5 years for us to pull together, all the records, have all these interviews, and spectacular in terms of the accuracy of this.
And it's weird because he worked at Skyline for quite some time, but you also say you spoke with the principals and there were no complaints in regards to how he, taught at the school. And so it, for him to have so many grooming, multiple students, and who knows if there's anyone else that he's groomed, it is something to note that he doesn't have any blemishes on his record in regards to the school at Skyline. Now, I understand that there is the sexual assault allegations, but I also saw child abuse in the article where he paddled some young girls, one blacked out. There's a settlement regarding that. I saw something else in regards to a story he tells about his mother that you guys found out was falsified. And just a couple other things that seem to stick out in regards to him allowing people to date within the church. If he didn't condone you dating someone, you couldn't date them. And so I don't know where to begin on those allegations. Let's start with the child abuse, because I think Donna knows a little bit about that. She may want to speak a little bit on that, but you know, we'll get to, let's go with Donna first in regards to the child abuse allegations.
Okay. This part is very sensitive because there are still things that I'm learning in reference to the abuse of my own son. Let me go back. When I went through my divorce of my first husband, you know, and you already know my history with Rush from high school. He's always been a part of my life on an very personal level from 16 years old. So I remained at the church, and he remained a very, very much a prominent, you know, major part of my life. I was very active in the church, and he kind of gave me a voice, and from being, you know, embarrassed and ashamed of being being pregnant in high school, he kind of gave me a name and a status at church. So I just kind of clung to him, you know, with gaining respect. And so through that, me and my boyfriend, we grew our children up at the church. And when we went through our divorce, that was one, you know, with the allegations of him not choosing who you can date. You know, we went through all of those things where he tried to run him off, did not want to marry us, you know, went through all those things. And I'm just like, hey, you know, he has this thing for me, but I don't have a thing back for him. So, you know, I'm begging him to marry us. And so he eventually, after many years, he married us. And then my son, both of my sons, I've learned recently that both were abused, not just the one that I thought. It was both that were abused. Both of my sons loved him very much. And when I went through that divorce, that younger son started to act out because this was his dad. And I didn't think that his dad at the time was nurturing him like a father should, to help us to keep an environment where our son would feel comfortable enough, you know, with us going through this divorce. I knew my older son would be okay because his dad was back in his life. And as far as discipline, I could call his dad, hey, Steven's doing this, yada, yada, whatever. Well, with Marcus, he loved Rush. So, and he would always be the one Rush would put on the pulpit and let him preach and let him pray over the church and all kinds of stuff. He would go in his office from when he was really small, really young. So I'm thinking he was taking him under his wing because he said, I want to get in his head. I want to see where he is, you know, keep an eye out on him because this divorce is going to be really hard. When he started acting out, he told me that he would put him in his boys. He told me he had a program that was a boys to men type program, and he would have my son in that. And I asked him, what would it consist of? You know, just wanting to know. And he said that basically he would spend a lot of time talking with him, ministering to him as far as, you know, the divorce, understanding how that goes. He would also put him to work in the church, and that sometime he would eventually have him work at his house he had animals and stuff. So I was okay with that. What I've like I said, this is all unfolding for me. And here recently, I spoke with my oldest son because I asked him, why hadn't he told me, you know, about, you know, what I'm hearing now and recognizing as beating. He said that Rush used to paddle him a lot. And I said, well, I know of one time he paddled you in 7 that I gave permission, and I was there. And Rush had asked me to step outside because the boys, you know, not cleaning up, just basic stuff, I'm thinking. And he asked me to sit outside his office, and he paddled them a couple of, 2 or 3 pops, and they were out of there, and we went home.
Okay.
And so that's where I knew, and I had given him permission. That's the only time I even knew that he paddled them.
So you didn't know any other times that he paddled them?
Never.
Okay. So when you say abuse, you mean physical abuse and not sexual abuse in regards to the children?
So, with my oldest son, I learned, about him giving him 30 and 40 paddlings pops with a boar. My son tells me now that his bottom was purple, his legs and bottom were purple and black. I asked him, why didn't you tell me? He says that because we were members of the church and we thought you were okay with him disciplining us. I told him that was not discipline, that was beating. There's a difference between, somebody jacking you up versus somebody beating you. Right. Then I learned recently that my younger son, had been paddled without his pants on. I also learned from my son's girlfriend, indirectly, not directly from my son. I learned after I made a Facebook post in 2018, after I had identified for the first time Rush as my abuser, I decided to take to Facebook and say, Rickie Rush abused me and my son. Well, at that time, I knew it was physical abuse. I didn't know about the older son at the time, and I knew it was sexual abuse with me. So that's what I was talking about. Well, from that Facebook post, my younger son's, the children's mom came to me and tells me, well, Seven told me he was a monster. Seven told me that Rush used to do things to him. And that's when I learned that, I'll say three things, that he had my son naked at various times. And that's why I'll leave that and won't go into any other details about that.
Okay.
What age, Donna? What age was that?
From the time he was between 10 and 11 years old, the very first situation, up until he was probably about 16 years old, as far as I'm knowing. So from the time he was 10, very early, and then the beatings that I know of, I'm still unraveling some of this, but so it's physical and sexual there between 10, 16 years old in there. So
okay, so let's go back to Miles and Sue in regards to these child abuse cases, because there's one that actually made it to the courts and you guys were able to look at the documents, and you see that there was a settlement, but it's an undisclosed amount. So can you tell me a little bit more about that, Sue or Miles?
Sure. Yeah, and thank you for having us on. We really appreciate it. We were able to obtain depositions and some court documents, other documents that indicated that there was a civil action against Rickie Rush I think it was filed in 2011, and it was the court records are kind of limited. It was, but we were able to see who was involved. He is named in those court records, and then we were also able to obtain other documents that contain testimony of that described these beatings. So the situation that was described was one where two girls had been texting boys against their parents' wishes. The girls were sent to Rush for discipline, and the boys were present during the discipline session, and it was beatings. It was the girls bent over a chair, side by side, beating until one girl blacked out. Her knees buckled. Rush revived her with a wet cloth. Continued. He would ask the boys how many licks they thought the girls deserved, or no, that they should get, that the boys should get. And they set a number, and instead, Rush delivered those licks to the girls.
I guess my question is, because I have a daughter, and I wouldn't let anybody discipline my child besides me or maybe a family member. And I'm just trying to understand. I mean, I see there's a pattern going on that Renee and Donna have both addressed, where he is seeming to be some type of father figure to the congregants of the church. And it's good to have people step in and fill in the gap. You need the community. It takes a village to raise children. But at the same time, to abuse children, that's a bit much. And
well, I think what we've discovered through our reporting is that the children didn't always describe the extent of what happened to their parents, and they thought the parents knew. Like in Donna's case, and she's just described, her sons think they know, and it's just this it's just this situation where no one's telling because each thinks the other knows, and we've heard this several times, and that is what happened.
yeah, and then with Donna just mentioning, it was physical abuse, but also possible sexual abuse as well. And that, of course, is going to be an ongoing investigation. I understand that this is something that you guys are still looking into. There are possible other people that are willing to come forward. And if they are, they can reach out to the Dallas Morning News so you can continue your investigation in regards to that. And, the reason why I'm even bringing these things up, because this kind of builds character. So when you talked about him telling the story about his mother, why would anyone lie about how their mother passed away? Now, you're saying he has a book where he wrote in the book that his mother was attacked and he saw her pass away. But you did some research and you found out that the mother actually passed away due to liver disease, and it had nothing to do with her being attacked and murdered. Why did you decide to even look into that story in the first place?
That's a great question. And so to go back, I mean, in so many of these cases, the perpetrator is turning the tables, right? Accusing the survivors of their sexual abuse of, lying, doing something to benefit themselves, right? Attacking their credibility. And in this case, part of our job was to carefully kind of pick apart his messages over the years, right? The messages about the devil controlling your thoughts. These are things that tie into what experts will tell you are spiritual abuse. After an incident where he inappropriately touches or attempts to penetrate one of them, he comes back and he says, "Don't let the devil steal your joy." These are things that are their stories point to a very manipulative person. So we're looking for any kind of independent corroboration. In his book a few years ago, Pendulum, Coming Out Swinging, he describes how when he was 10 years old, teenagers essentially broke down the door to his home, charged in and violently harmed his mother, killed his mother. And so, our job is to check that out. So we went to the Dallas medical examiner's office, and the report, I'm holding it right here and probably tweet it out later today, says that she died of natural causes. Okay, she died of liver disease. And you have 3 medical examiners signing this report on the day that she passed, or shortly after she passed away. So this kind of documentation goes straight to the credibility of the accused, and very important, obviously.
Honestly, I have no words in regards to that. Like I said, I think it is brave for you women.
Jazze, can I say something on that note?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just say this. That was the one way that him using his mother's death, and what he told us, me and my sister, was that she was raped and murdered in front of him. So when he told us that, he told me at 16 years old. And that caused me to be closer to him, to feel, because I had been molested. We both have a history of molestation. And so he told us that he worked for the Rape Crisis Center and that he helped abused victims. So by him telling us that, that helped me to open up, to feel comfortable and confident in trusting his his techniques and his ways about helping with that. And then for him to turn around and to actually abuse me, I just saw it as he had this thing for me, not that he had this thing for others. I thought I was the only one.
Right. And what do you say? Because I know that Renee has written a memoir, and, the story is getting out and people are talking about it. So what do you say to the people who are saying that you are only doing this because he stopped giving you money, or you're trying to get money, or something to do with money? What do you have to say about that? And Renee, you can go.
Okay. Now, for me, he has always tried to offer money during high school at Skyline while I was a student, all the time. So me personally, I never accepted any money from him. I worked while I was in high school. I've always been financially stable when it comes to being young like that. So as far as the book, my book is actually, it's my story to really allow young people, the young generations, to really be aware of the predators like him, to understand how it happened. It's just more in depth about what I experienced, so I won't have to repeat it over and over. I hope that it's going to bring awareness to a culture and a church and school setting, to help someone else. And it's not about the money, I've never been about that. So.
And I noticed that there was a protest actually this past Sunday at the church, and Donna was out there and smashed the topic breaking news. They were covering it, and it seems as though there were other people out there who had their own stories. And I guess the question is, are you going to continue the protest, and what are you trying to get in regards of the outcome by coming out and telling this story? What do you want to happen?
We want him to step down.
We want Rickie Rush to be muted. We want him to be muted, and we want him to step down, because he does not reflect what we, being Christians, believe that a man of God represents. And he's in a very powerful place, using the word of God to manipulate people. And we just want people to know. So until enough people knows, until he steps down and until he's muted and unable to be in a position to harm people with his spiritual tactics, like his sermon that day was watch your mouth. And he wasn't telling us to watch our mouths. He was telling his congregation to watch their mouths. And that is the way that he will use the word to make them feel like, oh, I'm not supposed to say this about the preacher. Well, at the end of the day, when the preacher is doing these types of things, he should not be in that position. And it needs to be known. It's not about money. It's about awareness, and it's about accountability, and it's about the children. I have grandchildren now. I do not want my grandchildren, to be subjected to somebody like him. It's not just about him. He's not the only one. This is happening in the Catholic churches. This is happening in many places. And we believe that by us speaking out and talking about this, because this is something that our communities, the Black communities, sweep under a rug. We hold our preachers at a standard where they're God, and they should not be there. And so we need to deal with it.
And were the police notified? I mean, I understand, again, this is an ongoing investigation, and the statute of limitations have ran out, I believe. But if you guys have additional people come out and speak, are you planning on taking it to the police?
Anybody right now that is listening under the sound of our voices, if they are in a position where they're afraid, because we've spoken to some victims who have been paid off, they say that they've been paid off and they're afraid to voice it because they believe they'll get in trouble. Well, you can't pay somebody off to victimize them and sexually abuse them underage. You can't, they won't get in trouble for speaking up to the police. So we're sending people to the police. We're sending people to Miles and Sue to talk to them so that they can get the counseling that they need and they can speak to the police. So yes, we want these victims to speak out like they are already doing.
Well, we are actually running out of time, guys, and this looks like this is something that we may have to come back and revisit. You know, this is just one of many conversations that we may have to have in regards to this story as the story continues to develop. And again, I commend you both from coming forward. I know you've gotten a lot of backlash from the community, so it takes a lot of bravery to come out and say these things about someone who's well known and respected. And I know Pastor Rush, and he was always a nice person to me, and I know his daughter, and you know, so I'm kind of in the middle in regards to this, but I feel like we can't silence the voices of women who are trying to speak out, because if there's some truth to this, we need to go ahead and let your voices be heard. So with that being said, again, if Pastor Rickie Rush would like to come on and talk about this issue, we would love to have him. And I just want to thank everybody for joining me here today. Again, this conversation is very difficult. And if you are a victim of sexual abuse, you can always call the National Sexual Abuse Hotline. The number is 1-800-656-4673. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jazze. Thanks.
Be blessed.